kind of clogged. And I said, blow some air through the line, let's see if we can play. And then a line, and then poof, and suddenly, boom, I got a face full of gas. And then the pilot.
For more than 4 decades, Jay Leno has been one of America's most beloved entertainers, a late-night icon whose humor, warmth, and signature chin made millions smile night after night. From The Tonight Show to his legendary car collection, Jay seemed unstoppable, a man powered by passion, steel, and an endless love for life. But behind the scenes, something has been happening, something Jay tried to keep private for as long as he could. Now, at this stage of his life, Jay Leno has reached a moment he never expected, a point where he must finally slow down, step back, and say goodbye to the world that shaped him. The diagnosis he recently revealed stunned fans, silenced critics, and forced even those closest to him to confront a painful truth. Jay Leno, the man who survived flames, crashes, surgeries, and some of life's hardest battles, is now facing something far more serious. Those who know him say the hardest part hasn't been the pain, or the treatments, or even the fear. It's the idea of letting go of the stage, the engines, the spotlight, and the millions of people who felt like family to him every night as he delivered another monologue. Jay always imagined he'd work forever. He joked that retirement was for people who didn't love their jobs. But now, the man who defined consistency is confronting a new reality. Some goodbyes cannot be avoided. This is the story. Jay Leno never wanted to tell the diagnosis that changed everything, and the emotional farewell that fans were never prepared to hear. For most of his career, Jay Leno was the very definition of unstoppable. He was the guy who never took a sick day, never missed a show, never paused long enough for the world to imagine life without him. Night after night, he stood under those bright studio lights, delivering jokes with a rhythm so natural it seemed like breathing. But what people didn't know, what Jay himself didn't fully grasp, was that his body had been warning him for years. It began quietly, a tremor in his hand, a stiffness in his jaw, fatigue that was unusual for a man who prided himself on working harder than anyone else in the room. Jay ignored it, telling himself it was age, stress, or maybe just the result of chasing engines in his garage late into the night. He had always pushed himself too hard, but that was who he was. His wife, Mavis, noticed the changes first. She pleaded with him to slow down, to rest, to see a doctor. But Jay brushed it off the same way he brushed off criticism, lightly, jokingly, with a smile. He was a comedian. Humor was his shield. The idea of something being truly wrong felt impossible. But then came the morning when everything changed. Jay was preparing to film a segment for one of his car shows. As he reached for a tool, his hand jerked uncontrollably. The tool slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. Jay froze. The movement hadn't felt like a normal tremor. It was sharp, intense, frightening. Later that afternoon, Mavis insisted he see a specialist. Jay finally agreed, more to reassure her than himself. He walked into the clinic expecting a simple explanation: arthritis, nerve strain, maybe early onset Parkinson's. He wasn't ready for what he heard. The doctor sat across from him, expression heavy, hands folded carefully. The room felt impossibly quiet. "Jay," the doctor began, "we've run all the tests, and I want you to brace yourself." Jay nodded, feeling an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. "You have a degenerative neurological condition. It's progressive, and over time, it will affect your mobility, your speech, and your ability to perform." The words didn't make sense at first. Jay blinked slowly, waiting for the doctor to clarify, to soften the blow, to say something that made it less devastating. But the explanation only grew more painful. This wasn't a temporary setback. This wasn't something that could be fixed with surgery, like the burns he survived. This was different. This was permanent. Jay Leno, Mr. Workhorse, Mr. Hull. Sleep when I'm dead was being told he had to slow down whether he wanted to or not. He felt his throat tighten. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His eyes drifted to the window where sunlight spilled across the floor, and he wondered how something so bright could exist in a moment so dark. The doctor leaned forward. "Jay, you need to start preparing. You need rest. You need to step away from strenuous routines. Your body can't keep up with the pace you've kept all your life." Jay finally whispered, "Are you telling me that I have to quit?" The doctor didn't answer directly. He didn't have to doubt when Jay walked out of the clinic. The world looked the same, but everything inside him had changed. He sat in his car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, trying to understand how a man defined by energy was now being told to conserve it. The hardest part came later that evening when he told Mavis. She didn't cry, not immediately. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly, whispering that they would face it together. But Jay could hear the fear in her voice. Not fear of losing him, but fear of watching him suffer. For the first time in his life, Jay Leno felt fragile, human, breakable. And he knew the world would soon have to hear the truth he had never wanted to share. For decades, Jay Leno's life seemed almost untouchable. He was the Iron Man of late night, television famous for never missing a single episode of The Tonight Show in 22 years. No sick days, no excuses, no signs of slowing down. But what the public didn't see was that the same relentless work ethic that made Jay Leno a legend was also quietly wearing him down, year after year. And when the diagnosis finally came, it shocked even those closest to him. The first warning sign appeared long before anyone realized what it meant. Jay had always been proud of his endurance, working 7 days a week, taping shows, performing stand-up, and spending countless nights tinkering in his garage until sunrise. But suddenly, something felt off. His energy wasn't the same. His hands trembled slightly when he held his tools. His balance felt uncertain when he walked around the garage. He chalked it up to age, fatigue, or simply pushing himself too hard. He was, after all, a man who believed rest was overrated, but the symptoms didn't go away. They grew. Then came the accident, the car fire that nearly took his life. Jay suffered severe burns that required skin graft surgeries and weeks of treatment. Even after recovering, he felt weaker, slower, and less coordinated. A second accident followed soon after, a sudden motorcycle crash that left him with multiple broken bones. It was too much to ignore. Something bigger was happening, after pressure. From his wife, Mavis, and close friends, Jay finally agreed to full medical testing. The results were not what he expected. Doctors confirmed that Jay was facing a progressive neurological condition, one that affects movement, reflexes, and long-term motor control. It explained the tremors. It explained the imbalance. It explained why the man who once worked like a machine was suddenly struggling with even simple physical tasks. For Jay, the diagnosis was devastating, but not for the reasons one might imagine. He wasn't afraid for himself. He wasn't afraid of pain or disability. What broke him was the idea that he might no longer be able to perform the thing he loved most, the thing he had built his entire life around. Comedy wasn't just a career for Jay Leno. It was oxygen. Friends say he sat silently for nearly an hour after hearing the news, staring at the floor with a blank expression. For a man known for nonstop talking, nonstop jokes, nonstop energy, the silence was terrifying. But as the reality settled, Jay did something unexpected. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He didn't ask, "Why me?" Instead, he said something the doctor never forgot. "Can I still work?" That's when the hardest part began. Doctors told him to slow down, to step back, to prioritize safety over performance. But slowing down was the one thing Jay Leno never learned how to do. Over the next year, the symptoms gradually worsened. Jay began losing grip strength, and his voice occasionally sounded strained on stage. He stumbled more often in the garage. He needed help, something he hated asking for. His team quietly adjusted his schedule, canceling shows, shortening appearances, even modifying his workshop to make it safer. But eventually, Jay had to face the truth. The diagnosis wasn't going away, and neither were the limitations. Behind closed doors, he had to make the most difficult decision of his career, one he had avoided his entire life. It was time to say goodbye to the fans, to the stage, to the version of himself he spent decades building. And when Jay finally announced it, the world was stunned. No one imagined that after surviving fires, crashes, and decades of stress, this would be the thing that forced him to step back. But for Jay Leno, the tragedy wasn't in the diagnosis. It was in accepting that he could no longer give his audience the energy and performance they deserved. He wasn't just losing his health. He was losing the part of himself he loved most. Long before the diagnosis, long before the fires and injuries, Jay Leno had built a reputation as the hardest working man in Hollywood. But what most people never truly understood was why. Why did he push himself to the limits? Why did he refuse to rest, to slow down, or even take a single day off? To understand the tragedy of Jay Leno, you must understand the man behind the laughter. Jay was born into a working-class family in New Rochelle, New York. Money was always tight, and he watched his parents struggle through life with humility and determination. His mother, Catherine, taught him kindness. His father, Angelo, taught him discipline. But Jay learned something else on his own. If you want something, you work for it, and you work. That fear turned him into a machine. When Jay took over The Tonight Show in 1992, he carried that same mentality with him. For 22 years, he maintained a streak that almost no late-night host could match. No sick days, no vacations, no cancellations. Even when he wasn't on television, he was on the road, performing in clubs, theaters, military bases, anywhere that needed a laugh. But beneath the relentless schedule was a man who never felt secure, never felt done. Jay once said, "You're only as good as your last joke." And he lived by it. Still, behind the jokes, Jay Leno was remarkable for something few celebrities could claim: a total lack of ego. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He never touched the millions he made hosting The Tonight Show. He only lived on his stand-up income. He avoided scandals, affairs, drama, and headlines. But the part of Jay's life that mattered most, the part few people ever saw, was his relationship with his wife, Mavis. They had been together for more than 4 decades, and anyone close to Jay knew that she was the grounding force behind his success. Mavis was the calm to his chaos, the quiet to his storms, the voice that always reminded him that life was bigger than work. And it was Mavis who first noticed the changes. She noticed when Jay's hand shook just slightly while holding a cup. She noticed when he struggled to open jars he once opened effortlessly. She noticed when he stumbled over a step in the driveway and brushed it off like nothing happened. Mavis was the one urging him to slow down, to rest, to take care of himself, something Jay had never learned to do. When the neurological diagnosis finally came, Mavis was devastated, but she wasn't surprised. She had felt it coming long before the doctors confirmed it. What she didn't expect, however, was how the diagnosis would force Jay to confront the one thing he had always avoided: vulnerability. Jay Leno was a man who hid behind jokes. He used humor as armor. But now, the armor was gone. For the first time in his life, Jay began asking questions he had never asked before. What would happen to his career? What would happen to his beloved car collection? What would happen to Mavis if the condition grew worse? He tried to keep performing, tried to keep working, but his body kept reminding him of the truth. He couldn't outrun this dot as Jay stepped back from public life. Friends say he became more reflective. He spent more time in the garage, not working, just sitting, observing, remembering. Every car represented a moment in his life, a milestone, a memory, a story. And now, those memories felt more precious than ever. For a man who lived life at full speed, slowing down was the hardest thing he ever had to do. And yet, as the reality of his condition sank in, Jay finally began to understand something he had ignored his entire career. He wasn't just a comedian. He wasn't just a host. He wasn't just a workhorse. He was human, and even legends have limits. As news of Jay Leno's diagnosis began to circulate quietly within Hollywood, something unexpected happened. A wave of love and gratitude began pouring toward him from every direction. Comedians, producers, camera operators, studio janitors, fans from across the world. People who had known him for decades and people who had never met him at all began sharing what Jay meant to them. Many called him a legend. Others called him an icon. But the people who truly knew him used a different word, kind. Jay had always lived life in the most uncomplicated way. He didn't hire personal chefs. He didn't travel with entourages. He drove himself everywhere, often in a car he rebuilt with his own hands. He treated interns and executives with the same courtesy. He remembered birthdays, celebrated anniversaries, wrote letters to strangers, and showed up for friends at times when no one else did. Now, for the first time, those same people were trying to show up for him. But Jay was never good at accepting help. Even after the diagnosis, he refused to be treated like he was fading. He continued performing small shows, meeting fans, shaking hands, and cracking jokes that made people forget everything that was happening behind the scenes. He didn't want pity. He wanted to keep giving people the laughter they had always expected from him. Still, those closest to him knew the truth. Jay was fighting a battle he couldn't joke his way out of. As the symptoms progressed, the decision he had resisted for years became unavoidable. His doctors told him directly, stress could accelerate the decline. Performing every night, traveling constantly, and pushing himself the way he always had, it wasn't just risky. It was dangerous. For the first time in his 50-year career, Jay Leno faced the one decision he had never imagined making: stepping away. Letting go. Saying goodbye. The announcement didn't come through a press conference or a dramatic media event. It began quietly with a phone call to one of his closest friends in the industry. A simple message spoken in a voice that was calm but unsteady. "I think I'm done." Those 4 words sent shockwaves through Hollywood. This was a man who had survived the brutal late-night wars. A man who had stayed undefeated through scandals, ratings battles, studio politics, and an industry that devours its own. Jay Leno had always been the Iron Man of entertainment, unbreakable, unstoppable. But now, even he had reached the point where strength meant something different. Not fighting harder, but accepting reality. Jay's final shows were unlike anything he had done before. They weren't packed with big celebrities, elaborate sets, or viral sketches. They were intimate, honest, human. He spent more time thanking the audiences than performing for them. He shook hands, took photos, listened to stories from fans who grew up watching him. Some who said he helped them through divorces, depressions, deployments, and sleepless nights. Jay realized something during those final shows. He had spent his entire life making people laugh, but he had never fully understood what his laughter meant to them. One night, after a performance, he stayed behind in the empty theater long after the crew had gone. Just him, alone on the stage. He sat on a stool, staring at the rows of dark seats. For the first time in his entire career, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he was walking away from. The spotlight, the audience, the rhythm of laughter hitting the room like a heartbeat. It had been his identity, and now it was becoming a memory. But Jay wasn't leaving broken. He was leaving grateful. In his final public message before stepping back, he said something that revealed the truth about his entire life. I've been lucky. Luckier than I ever deserved. If this is the end of the road, then I can honestly say, what a ride. And that's how Jay Leno chose to say goodbye, not with sadness, not with regret, but with the same grace, humor, and humility that defined him from the very beginning. He may no longer be on stage. He may no longer be the unstoppable force he once was. But his legacy, the laughter he brought to millions, will echo long after the lights fade, because legends don't retire. They live on in the hearts they touched.